Spielen wir den Dummen oder spielen wir... Ach komm, ja. Ich finde die erste Antwort jetzt gerade irgendwie lustiger. Ich bin gerade in Stimmung dafür. After a little thought, Jumpy decided that she had to be nervous about being locked up in such a small space alone with a boy. Was eigentlich absoluter Schwachsinn ist. Ich meine, sie war vorhin diejenige, die mit uns alleine duschen wollte, aber egal. In a way, it was kinda cute. Very demure, you could say, he thought. Still, even though it wasn't exactly roomy in the elevator, they weren't going to be pressed up against one another. At least, they didn't have to be. Yeah. Still, it was making her nervous. Jumpy couldn't help but think how innocent she was. Come on, let's go. Again, he stepped toward the elevator. And again, he felt himself restrained. I said, wait a minute. Why? Aren't you afraid, Jumpy? Afraid of what? Well, I've never, you know... She'd never been in an elevator with a man alone before? Even so, she still seemed awfully alarmed. I might get wet. What? Down there, I'd get soaking wet. Well, I mean, of course you would. That's the way it works. I mean, I've never heard of anyone getting soaking wet somewhere else. That's true. You don't mind? Mind what? Getting wet. Well, I don't know. I think I'd probably, you know, like it. Gosh, Jumpy, you're so brave. Really? I mean, I kinda think any guy would do the same thing, you know? What happens, happens, right? If you get the chance, you've just gotta go for it. That's what a man's supposed to do, I guess. Entschuldigung. Es fällt mir schwer, bei diesem Dialog ernst zu bleiben, aber ich find's einfach zu geil. You're so cool, Jumpy. I really admire you. That doesn't really seem like the sort of thing you ought to admire someone for. I'm really scared. Yeah, I mean, like you said, you've never done it before. Yes. So I don't think I'll be able to last very long, and then it'll be over. Over? Yes. I'll go to heaven. Heaven? It feels kind of like you're floating in space and your mind gets all fuzzy like when you pass out. At least, that's what I've heard from people who have experienced it. Yes, I've heard that too. Although, I don't think the same thing happens to guys. What? Huh? But it would happen to men too, wouldn't it? It would happen to anyone. Once it gets into your body, the same thing happens to everyone. Well, I mean, usually it doesn't go inside the man. I mean, generally. Yes, it does. Well, eventually it will. It's not like you really have a choice. Your body will force you to swallow some of it eventually. What are you trying to do to me? Das ist so geil. Ich hoffe, jeder von euch versteht das. Nur für die ganz zart beseiteten Gemüter unter euch oder so, die jetzt nicht so richtig hundertprozentig verstehen, worüber ich lache. Jumpy denkt, die reden über Sex und June macht sich Sorgen darüber, dass die da unten ertrinken. Logisch, weil das Schiff ist vollgelaufen mit Wasser. Ja, gut. Jetzt habe ich es eigentlich, es war so, solche Dinge sollte man einfach nicht erklären. Man sollte sie einfach im Raum stehen lassen. Aber ich finde das einfach zu schön, wie dieser Dialog gestaltet ist. Es ist einfach herrlich. Und da könnt ihr morgen auf dem Schulhof wenigstens alle mitreden, die ihr es nicht verstanden habt. Also von daher, das ist schon... Ich glaube, das ist in Ordnung. What are you trying to do to me? Das ist so geil. Nothing. I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm just saying that that's what happens. It's a psychological reaction to what you're experiencing. Was that really how it happened? It occurred to Jumpy that perhaps that was how it worked. Perhaps he'd been mistaken all these years. Had he misunderstood life so gravely? The thought terrified him. June seemed to be entirely oblivious to Jumpy's mounting confusion and terror. I know most men probably have larger lungs, but even then I don't think you could hold your breath for 20 or even 10 minutes. Eventually you'd have to breathe and then the water would get into your lungs. Once that happens, your body won't be able to get oxygen anymore and you'll start to feel that floaty feeling as you pass out. Haha! Finally, Jumpy understood. He understood what June was trying to say and why she was so scared. Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't last very long, yeah. See? She was afraid that the only elevator button pointed down. That meant, of course, that the elevator couldn't go any higher than the floor they were on. As he thought about it, Jumpy realized he hadn't seen elevators on the A or B decks near the central staircase. All of which meant that the elevator could only convey them to the lower decks. And the floor below, the one they were on, D deck, should be completely submerged. That meant... Hey, wait a minute. This elevator came up from somewhere under us, right? Well, yes, I guess it did. It didn't open right away after you pressed the button. There was a motor noise, like it was moving, and then it opened. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, take a look inside. Jumpy jerked his head toward the interior of the elevator. It's not wet at all, is it? The walls and even the floor are totally dry. Oh, you're right, they are. She looked around the elevator, slightly embarrassed. Well, let's test it. Test it? Yeah, watch this. Jumpy put one foot in the elevator and bent around the corner of the door until he could see the floor buttons. There were only two, E and C. He pushed the E button and jumped out of the elevator. The door slid shut, and they heard the grinding of the motor as the elevator car moved down. Schlau gedacht. Ich entschuldige mich übrigens dafür, falls ich das jetzt zu albern rübergebracht habe oder so, aber der Moment ist einfach nur köstlich. Ehrlich. Er ist so schön. A few moments later, they heard the sound of the elevator door grinding open several floors below. Jumpy nodded to June and pressed the elevator button again. A few moments later, the elevator returned. So, entweder sie werden jetzt von einer Flutwelle überrascht oder aber... Nö. The door slid open, and just as Jumpy expected, there was no water to be found. See? Jumpy couldn't resist puffing out his chest just a little bit. June, however, still looked confused. What does it mean? How can the E deck be safe if the D deck is full of water? Well, here's what I think. The elevator shaft and E deck must be watertight and separated from wherever the ship's been punctured. Here, let me show you. He pulled out his notebook and pen and sketched out a rough illustration. I see. So is that why the ship hasn't sunk? The shape of the inside keeps it from all filling with water? Yeah, I think that's what's going on. Jumpy continued talking as he closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. So I'm gonna go down and check it out. You stay here, alright? But... Come on, just do it, alright? He gave June's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then hopped onto the elevator. He pushed the E button and the door began to close. June looked worried, her eyes darting back and forth as if she was trying to make a decision when suddenly...
I'm coming with you.
Huh? At the last possible moment, June dashed forward, turning sideways just in time to slip through the gap between the closing doors. Jumpy jammed his finger against the open button, but it was too late. The door had shut, he and June were in the elevator and it was headed down to E-Deck, wo es feucht werden könnte, unter Umständen. Was auch immer feucht werden könnte. Egal. Ich sollte echt aufhören. He was so surprised by June that he didn't even have time to think about what awaited him on the E-Deck. The elevator stopped and the door slid open. They stepped off onto the floor outside the elevator. Nothing seemed especially unusual. No fish going about their fishy business or jellyfish floating lazily through the water. There was, however, a blowfish. Or at least something that looked very much like one. June's cheeks were puffed out and her mouth a tiny intense frown. Oh, knock it off. It's just like I thought. This part hasn't flooded. Come on, just look around. There's no water here. June looked around nervously, then... exhaled.
You're right. It's not flooded at all.
See?
But there's a whole lot of water.
Yeah, right on top of us.
What's going to happen if the ceiling breaks?
Jumpy thought about that for a moment. Well, we'd probably get really wet up there.
Huh?
At any rate, we should probably go back as soon as we can once we're done looking around down here. Lotus and Santa might already be back.
Okay, good idea.
Jumpy glanced around the room they'd found themselves in. The first thing he noticed was a set of thick iron bars. They ran the length of the room, separating the left elevator from the right one. Well, we can't go over there.
Right.
Then perhaps... In the corner of the room that housed the elevators, Jumpy found an opening. He walked up to it and stuck his head around the corner. A long straight hallway stretched out in front of him.
That door at the end of the hallway. There's something written on it.
Yeah, let's go have a look. Sieht man auch sogar von hier, was da drauf steht. Jumpy and June set off down the hallway at a brisk clip, somewhere between a run and a jog. Before long, they found themselves in front of the door. On it was a number written in bright red paint. 6. I knew it.
This is a numbered door.
And indeed, there was a rat bolted to the wall right next to the door. Of course, with only 2 people, there wasn't much they could do with it. Alright, let's head back.
Yes.
Jumpy and June turned and headed back to C-Deck. On their way back, Jumpy noticed a map on the wall. As it turned out, it was a burned map of the ship's interior for E-Deck. Okay. Huh? So you guys found door 1. They'd met back up with Santa and Lotus, who had explained what they'd found. Apparently, there was another numbered door on A-Deck, just like the one on E-Deck beyond the door that the Earth Key opened. According to Santa and Lotus, there was a 1 on the door. All told, they had discovered 2 new doors, the 6 door and the 1 door.
It is interesting that E-Deck wasn't flooded.
Lotus was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. Well, we don't really know if all of E-Deck is safe. We only checked the area around the elevator.
Even so, it's still very interesting.
You said the 6 door was there, right?
Yes.
Then that means Zero planned all this out, even the sinking. That would have meant some pretty serious remodeling of the ship's interior.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Yeah, I wonder how long it took. I can't even imagine how much it must have cost.
It would have been a ton, that's for sure. Well, that does go along with that, with what Ace was saying. The most reasonable explanation would be that this was done by some organization with access to a whole lot of cash.
Yes, it does make sense.
That thought made them all go quiet for a moment. June bit her lip, while Lotus sighed softly to herself, and Santa cracked a stiff neck and stared off into the distance at nothing.
I don't think it's a very good idea to stay here.
June looked up at Jumpy with large pleading eyes. Yeah, you're right. Ace and his team might be back already.
Well, June, Jumpy and I should be able to open door 1.
Hä? You guys leaving me behind? 8 plus 6 plus 5 gleich 19. 1 plus 9 gleich 10. Stimmt, wir können durch Tür Nummer 1 gehen. Hurra!
Just kidding. Alright, let's go.
Lotus' words were all the impetus they needed. Back to the large hospital room they went. Woher der plötzliche Sinneswandel? Na gut, okay, weil sie wahrscheinlich begriffen hat, dass wir durch die Tür Nummer 9 so nicht gehen könnten. Also bringt es auch absolut gar nichts, so alleine durch Tür Nummer 1 zu gehen. Und jetzt bin ich gerade kurz am Überlegen, ob ich glaube, ich mache in diesem Moment jetzt gerade mal eine Pause. Ja, weil es jetzt mehr oder weniger gut passt, sage ich mal. Beim nächsten Mal geht's also weiter. Was haben wir heute alles gemacht? Wir haben das Labor untersucht, hinter Tür Nummer 8. Wir sind, wir haben uns mit der anderen Gruppe wieder getroffen. Wir haben Schlüssel ausgetauscht. Wir haben die Tür Nummer 6 und die Tür Nummer 1 mittlerweile gefunden. Und hoffentlich hat die andere Gruppe irgendetwas rausgefunden, was genau denn nun hinter Tür 3 verborgen lag. Aber was das genau ist, das werden wir leider erst beim nächsten Mal erfahren, wenn der Hering wieder 999, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors spielt. Ich hoffe, es hat euch heute so einigermaßen gefallen. Wie gesagt, über Kommentare würde ich mich freuen und auch über den einen oder anderen Verbesserungsvorschlag vielleicht, was die ein oder andere Sprechweise des einen oder anderen Wortes angeht. Aber der Erste, der mir jetzt irgendwie eine Liste mit 20 oder 30 oder mehr Wörtern schickt, der wird geflissentlich ignoriert. Nein, keine Ahnung. Macht mir das Leben nicht schwer. Ihr sollt in erster Linie ja auch dieses Let's Play eigentlich genießen. Ich kann es verstehen, wenn jemand die Krise kriegt, wenn ich immer und immer wieder irgendwie fortwährend einen Fehler mache. Das kann ich auf eine gewisse Art und Weise nachvollziehen, ja. Aber nichtsdestotrotz hängt euch bei gewissen Dingen bitte nicht zu sehr daran auf. Ich versuche es so gut es geht zu machen und euch irgendwie zu unterhalten und ich hoffe einfach, dass es gelingt und ja, irgendwie so. Ich hoffe, damit kann man leben. Na gut, okay, alles klar. Das war's also. Ich war der Heringway, das war, ihr wisst schon welches Spiel und ich sag jetzt einfach mal Tschö mit Ö und hoffentlich bis ganz, ganz bald.